Hi, everyone, and I am very pleased to welcome our today's guest, Vasil Moroshnichenko, who is the ambassador of Ukraine to Australia and New Zealand. Vasil, hello.
Hi, Ola. Very happy to join you today, and hello to everybody. So glad to be back in with American Councils. I used to spend lots of time there back in the day when American Councils and actually, America House now, right? That's what it's called. But it used to be an office of American Councils in the university, which I remember when I was actually applying for Flex program at the time. But anyways, happy to be back.
Happy to have you here. Yeah, and since you mentioned Flex, it's so inspiring that like once you were Flex finalist, now you're Flex alumnus, and through the years you shaped your career to be who you are now. And I maybe want to ask the first question about your Flex program. Where were you? How was that? Did you enjoy your experience?
Oh, look, I mean, those were the times when going to the US was like almost like flying to the moon today. And that's my best description of going to the US in 96, 97. I was 15 at that time, and I come from a small town of Volochysk, Khmelnytska Oblast. So certainly in those days, going to the US was a big deal. And I spent a year in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I spent 10 months there, and then got back, did one more year of school, and then got into university in Kiev, and a totally life changing experience, to be frank, and a lot. I've learned a lot actually. Also, what's funny actually that my reflections has been changing throughout my life. And every year I come up with some sort of new observation, new assessment of what impact it had, what how it shaped me, and what really all of that experience was for me. And of course, I've done many different leadership programs throughout my life, but definitely Flex was the most important one because it was the first one. And for somebody, in those days, in those early days, in the early 90s, that was definitely a life-changing experience, something which has defined me as a personality, as who I am today. So I will be forever grateful to the American government for sponsoring myself, but as well as all other students from Ukraine.
Yeah, so interesting. Thank you. And you mentioned that there were like so many lessons that you learned and you gained during Flex program. I'm myself the Globally Grad alumna, and I remember my experiences. And I want to ask about yours. What was like one of the lessons during the program which like taught you a lot? It can be like the situation that you remember from early days, or yeah.
I think, actually what's interesting that was that Flex experience, which has really impacted my interest in diplomacy and international
Mhm.
relations, because often I had to explain myself, who I am. And in a way, um, my identity as a Ukrainian was born in the United States. Because when you grow up in Ukraine, you don't have to explain to anybody who you are as a Ukrainian because you grew up Ukrainian, right? It's only when you go outside of Ukraine and you have to explain yourself to say who you are, where you come from, and that's how you actually are shaped as who you are. And I think that was that experience which really has helped me a lot because when you were yourself a teenager, right, and nobody knew anything about Ukraine, of course, in those days, and 1996, only 5 years after Soviet Union collapsed, I always had to explain how Ukraine is different from Russia, how Russian language is different from Ukrainian language, and who we are. And I remember I had a big map, um, which was like a poster map, which I brought from Kiev, and I would put it on the board there, and I would talk to students basically saying, let me tell you the history of Ukraine, and whatever I could tell them in those days. I was 15 myself, but I kind of had to educate myself as well, and I said, okay, I need to explain it to Americans. How do I do it? I need to make it very simple, but still understood how Soviet Union collapsed, how the country was fighting for its sovereignty for a long time. The history of Eastern Europe, how we were under different empires, experience under the Russian Empire, experience under Austro-Hungarian Empire, going back to the roots of statehood. different periods in history, and you still have kind of like give it a short overview, but also then coming back to who you are and why Ukraine became independent and all of that. And I think on my way back from the US, I've realized that look, it would be probably fascinating to study international relations, because one day I could become a diplomat, and that actually has generated that interest in the world, and maybe also in those mid 90s. I think a career in diplomacy was a way to explore the world. Of course, everything has changed now, and but it goes back to the Soviet times. Probably it's only once you join and become a diplomat, join the foreign service, that you can go to the Western countries and see Paris, see London, and therefore that job was so attractive. So in the mid 90s, I was still impacted by that kind of legacy of the Soviet Union, and excitement about studying foreign affairs, just for an opportunity to see the world. And of course, life has really, my path into diplomacy was not that straightforward, but happy to talk about it as we go.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to say that I started following your page maybe a year ago because a friend of mine who's also a Flex alumna, she was like, "Have you heard of Vasil Murashnik?" I'm like, "Sounds familiar, but who is he?" She's like, "Ola, you have to follow. He's like the best ambassador ever, and you like just read his like posts, his stories." And once I remember that you were speaking about like talking about Flex and uh just you can correct me if I'm wrong, but how it like helped you shape your vision of like who you want to be, like it helped you like polish that a bit. And I wanted to ask, so at that time during your Flax exchange, did you already feel that this experience can shape your long-term career, let's say diplomatic career, right? Or did this?
Not at all, actually. Yeah, not sorry. I mean, not at all, actually, because I think when you're that young, you don't really know who you want to be, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I had an interest in diplomacy in a way. Maybe that will be a way into kind of seeing the world,
yeah.
representing Ukraine internationally. But once I got into uni, it all has changed, and at early stage, I realized, while still studying diplomacy, I realized probably I'm not sure that that will be the right career path, just for that reason that usually being a public servant in Ukraine, you're not paid well. You actually paid nothing in those days, please. And pretty much when I was a fourth year student, I was already kind of realizing that I just can't afford to become a diplomat, right?
Mhm.
More so, I got married when I was 21, and my daughter was born. So I fully realized that now I had my only option to go to business, make some money, and actually to be able to provide for my family. So kind of diplomacy was knocked out of my list as my career, just because I couldn't afford it.
Yeah, I see. I see. Interesting. So, and okay. So after you, I assume you graduated from Cave National, right? University. And after that, so this realization that you want to be in diplomacy, did you want to do something connected to the government, or it was completely something different?
Oh, look, I mean, classical career in diplomacy is that you graduate from university. We still kind of had this inherited the legacy of the Soviet Union, so you had to study, with very few universities. Actually, the main one, Institute of International Relations, and it pretty much, if you really wanted to, you could get in, right? I mean, it was never a problem to get into the ministry. But the thing is, and then you kind of, you go through stages, you kind of grow in your career, and maybe 20 years later or so, you become an ambassador, right? But you have to raise up in the ranks. You need to do the postings, you need to work abroad, you need to do, political work, public diplomacy work, economic work, you name it. And, but that's kind of a classical approach of how you join, a foreign service and how you move up. At State Department, for instance, when you join foreign service, you always do the consular work. It's a must, right? It's almost like that survival school or whatever they call it. I mean, when you join the army, you go through that experience where everybody has to do it, right? In Ukrainian system, it's a bit different, but a lot of people also do consular work, where they work with Ukrainian citizens. They do passports, they do powers of attorney, or they provide any assistance to Ukrainian citizens, right? That's part of the job, right? And my kind of the way I got into diplomacy was way different from a usual path. But I have to say that, I was always, involved in people diplomacy, as I call it, or citizen diplomacy, and was heavily involved in various public diplomacy projects, cultural diplomacy, investment promotion, trade promotion. So, throughout my life, I was always involved heavily in explaining Ukraine to the world, and I really enjoyed it actually. And in a way, it goes back to the times when I was at the university. I was co-founder of a European Youth Parliament, which is a youth NGO. I was then the president of the youth NGO, and I went to Europe to represent Ukraine at different international sessions. I then, led the organization and recruited many people to do the same thing. And in those days, and that was 2002, 2004, it was just very early days of actual European integration for Ukraine. So as part of my mission was to actually educate Ukrainian young people about European Union, why it is a good idea for Ukraine to integrate into the European Union, the benefits of it, but also learning about the EU agenda, about some of the issues. And that was a phenomenal leadership experience and educational exercise for the people. I've also done internships at the Canadian Parliament. And as you know, I later on did a master's degree in international political economy at the London School of Economics. I was very lucky to get a scholarship from the British government, CUNY scholarship. And then IPE, International Political Economy, is pretty much part of the IR department at the LSE. But then, after I came back from London, whatever I did in my kind of day-to-day job running the consultancy in public affairs and public relations, a lot of the things that I did was still related somehow to diplomacy. So I was doing lots of work for Ukraine as a country, but never as part of the government. So my job here is the first time I'm working for the government, and I'm almost 4 years now. And I really value the support of Ukraine's president, who appointed me to come here, and probably the best job in my life. And the best job in my life just for one reason, because I can see the immediate impact of what I do. I really enjoy what I do, and every day I think about my friends in the trenches and feel like, what else can I do for them today? How much more assistance can I get for Ukraine? And it's a true inspiration and motivation for me. And I have visited Ukraine 10 times since I arrived in Australia. So I'm in Ukraine quite often, actually. I'm there almost every 3 or 4 months. I'm there. So it's not like, I went to Australia and kind of I'm here, but I often come for, our annual ambassadors meetings. I come with different visitors, and also being able to convince Prime Minister of Australia to visit Ukraine 3 years ago was a highlight of my kind of posting, because it never happened in Ukraine's history to host the Prime Minister of Australia. So it was a big deal and a huge, kind of milestone in our bilateral relations, because as you can imagine, Australia is 15,000 kilometers away from Ukraine, and the distance actually defines the way Australia sees the world, the way Australia kind of looks at Ukraine. So certainly bringing an Australian prime minister, and later on, of course, a deputy prime minister, the foreign minister, was not an easy one, as well as 2 defense ministers from New Zealand. It's always also been kind of one of those highlights. But look, coming back to your original question, I mean, diplomacy kind of was part of my life all the time, but it only professionally has become my job only the last 4 years. And it's quite interesting how I got into that, right? And really what was my story. But I can tell you one thing. I mean, to be in diplomacy, I mean, being part of the government is one of those things that you can do, but you can do so much as being part of civil society, right? And the work that I did with Ukraine Crisis Media Center when the war broke out originally, that was actually the time in 2014 when we were dealing with countering Russian propaganda and disinformation, or running campaigns for Ukraine in Europe. That was my time when I kind of got back into diplomacy at a more intense level, because all of a sudden I had to travel different European capitals, and I had to explain what Russia has done, how Russia invaded Ukraine, the pernicious impact of the Russian disinformation, hybrid warfare threats, also gray zone operations, which Russians were already rolling out in Ukraine, and how European countries can also be targets of Russian attacks. And I remember those 2014, many countries were discarding that, especially in Western Europe. And it was kind of, but that was the time when I kind of got back more heavily. Later on, I had an opportunity to work on a campaign in the Netherlands in 2016.
Mhm.
So I was sent there actually with another Flex alumnus, Alex Guzenko, who was there with me in a small team funded by donors, but through Ukraine Crisis Media Center, we were posted for 4 months into Netherlands, trying to, running campaign for Ukraine prior to the EU-Ukraine, prior to the referendum on the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, which, we miserably lost in 2016. But that was also one of those exercises, kind of what diplomats do, how to run public campaigns, how to present Ukraine, and a lot of the work we did, like personally, where I would do interviews, I would do speeches, I would do conference, different lectures, but also we would bring lots of other groups, both on a business side, but also on the side of civil society, and also running campaigns, showing films and whatnot, right? By the way, I remember cooperating with the U.S. Embassy in the Netherlands, who were very, very helpful, and they sponsored the screening of a Ukrainian film, Winter and Fire, which I think was a very important public diplomacy event in support of Ukraine in the Netherlands.
Wow, that's impressive. I mean, starting with your efforts of bringing Australian deputy prime minister, and yeah, you know what, you mentioned one statement, and I want to circle back to that. You said that for like to become a diplomat, to start your career in diplomacy, you like ideally should study in a couple of universities, should get like experience here and there. And speaking about your chevening program, right? So, given that our target audience is students who maybe have not gone abroad yet to study, what is something that you notice that differs education abroad from the one that we have here? What is like some major differences in your opinion?
Look, I mean, it's a long topic to defend, Ola, because
Yeah.
I mean, I can share my observations. Plus,
Mhm.
I've had lots of my friends and peers actually who all done their master's degrees abroad. Like some went to the US, some went to the UK, some done that in Europe, and for me, there was a lot of peer pressure when I did my master's program because all my friends did it. And by the way, a lot of them were flex, but not necessarily flex, and they all went to some of the best universities in the world. Some went to study at Johns Hopkins University, some went to study at Georgetown, some went to Harvard, some went to Cambridge or Oxford. And I could always compare notes, right? I had a fantastic year at the LSE, which I really enjoyed and loved. And in a way, but also British education is different from American universities, right? British schools are mostly focused on self-education. So there's a lot of discipline that you need to put in place. Actually have like 2 months of study during Michaelmas term in October and November, and then 2 months of study, in the Lent term, and then pretty much you have 3 months to self-study, and then you write an exam and you're done, and then you write your long essay, which is kind of called dissertation, but it's a long essay. You submit it before September 1st, and then if you're lucky, you get a degree, right? So it's a totally different approach to American universities where you have term exams, midterm exams, much more rigorous
Yeah.
program. Starts early already in August. It starts in Britain, it only starts on 1st of October. So, and often the master's programs in America are 2-year programs, whereas in Britain, oh, you can get it only in 1 year. Can you see me there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, something popped up on my screen and I thought I lost you. And
No,
so
no,
in a
okay.
way, look, but now let's circle back. I mean, my experience of 5 years at IR in studying IR was actually very good for the job that I'm currently doing, right? Because in kind of Soviet Union and then still what we do in Ukraine, I mean, not much has changed. The program in IR is very specific actually and very practical. So we study lots of history because I believe history is the most important subject for diplomacy, especially history of the 20th century, like the global history of the world. Whatever happened in the 20th century defines whatever is happening now. So you need to know it, but better if you know it, back from the um, medieval times and you understand what was the evolution, the Westphalia system, the yeah, the Congress of Vienna, whatever happened in the 19th century, and of course World War One, World War Two. I mean, and then Cold War period. I mean, these periods are so important for diplomacy. But I mean, you can learn it by reading several books, of course. But when you have classes, which is very important. Also, IR in Ukraine, often it's just a combination of different subjects. So classical IR. So you do lots of history, then you have international law, you have international economics, and then you do actually stuff which in many systems in many countries they only learn it on the job. Like they learn it when they join State Department, they learn it when they join foreign service, right? In for the foreign and FCDO in Britain, and then they would take people from all different subjects, and then they educate them and train them on the job. Ukrainian system classically was a bit different, though it's changing, of course, now. Where you would already, when you get the job at the ministry, they already expect you how to write a third-party note, which is called note verbale, right? Which we use kind of for that. So we were trained how to write those, official correspondence. I mean, in Britain and Australia, you learn it on the job. Once you join DFAT, which is their ministry, you learn it there, right? But in Ukraine, they teach you how to do it back at uni, and then you have this official correspondence as a class, or you have diplomatic correspondence in English as a class, or you have specifically classes related to the Vienna Conventions on Consular and Diplomatic Relations, where you actually have to write exams specifically on the legislation which defines relationships within different countries, which is very specific, right? But so in Ukraine, you actually get that training if you do IR, right? If you do IR, you do international law, international economics. I mean, because that's part of the curriculum. I mean, I wouldn't say it's good or bad. It's just different, right? And certainly there is nothing there that you can't learn on the job, because once you join foreign ministry, right, the foreign service, I mean, you can all learn it as you go, and usually people learn it because there are people at our ministry who come from different universities, had different kinds of education. We had a minister who had a training in nuclear physics, right, and then he became a diplomat. And there are many cases like that, especially in the early 90s when Ukraine became independent and they were trying to get some new people. But what's important, I think my advice to, if you ask me about advice to the young people, I think it's very simple. I think it's foreign languages. So you all must speak English. I mean, your English must be perfect. I mean, I don't understand why young people don't speak English, because I think I mean, it was very difficult. We didn't have access to the real language. In today's world, YouTube and TikTok and you name it, I mean, there's no excuse for not speaking English fluently. I mean, no matter what, right? Everybody can learn language, and you all must be fluent. And no excuses. If you're young, you don't speak, it's too bad. I'm sorry. I mean, next one is speak another foreign language. And I have to say that I don't speak another foreign language. And unfortunately, I don't count Russian as another foreign language. Though, I mean, I can probably list it formally, but I don't think it works. And for that, well, I've studied a little bit of French. I've studied some New Greek as well, but I've never kind of learned it enough to be proficient. And I still kind of believe I want to fix it. I still want to learn French and speak it one day. But at the same time, I think I should have done it when I was young and when I was at uni. And I think you can pick any other European language, French, German, or Spanish, or pick some exotic languages like Bahasa. Indonesia is a huge country, 280 million people live there. It's one of the top economies in the world. The country is changing drastically. If you speak Bahasa, you can become an expert on Indonesia, and there'll be huge demand for your expertise. I mean, you can learn Mandarin as well. I mean, you can learn Arabic. I mean, but it does help, and I believe there could be some more specific, like Turkish language, right? Turkey is a big country, very important for Ukraine. So you can just learn another language as you go. But in terms of skills, I think look, of course, people will tell you it's analytical skills, research skills. I mean, that all it's all important, right? You need to write clearly. But I think in the world of AI, writing clearly is now becoming kind of, in a way, I mean, it's important that you can do it on your own without AI, right? But let's face it, I mean, the world is changing. I mean, the application of AI in today's world is phenomenal, right? And I think, more and more will be done by AI, and you
Yeah.
don't really have to write it. But what's important is about communication. So we still cannot have AI communicate verbally, right? Probably yes, but in today's world, you still can't do it. You still have to go on air. You still have to go on television, and you have 3 minutes, and you have to tell your story in 3 minutes, right? And that's something you can only learn by doing, actually. And
Yeah.
communication skills, public speaking, uh, media training, talking with, dealing with media is a different world. Luckily, I for 20 years in my private job, right? And in a way, what I did as a lobbyist in Ukraine, so I used to lobby Ukrainian government on behalf of American and British companies. Now I lobby Australian government on behalf of Ukrainian government. So in a way, the skill set that I learned on my job, it was easily transferable to what I do now, because the approach is the same, right? Is how to engage directly, how to run campaigns, how to create alliances in support of Ukraine, how to use surveys and polls, how to use op-eds, and generally media work. And so it's all very similar. So diplomacy is about lobbying in a way, because ambassadors are lobbyists, right? And in a way, I did it for a living for 20 years. And then I got this job, and I was doing the same thing that I did for my clients in Ukraine. It just in a different client, right? So I got a government as a client, and now work for the government. So, but the approach is the same thing. And maybe that's why, and also having the educational background in IR helps me with subject matter, because and look, it all depends. And we've seen in history diplomats, career diplomats who are very successful. We've seen some non-career diplomats who are very successful. So like the path you take in diplomacy does not really define your success or not, right? You can be a career diplomat all your life, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be an outstanding, ambassador, or you can be non-career. And so basically, it's not about how you got into diplomacy. You can still make a huge impact no matter what your background is, right? And in
Yeah.
a way, in my case, I mean, I'm really proud of my business experience, because I treat this job as I want to kind of leave a legacy. I want to do something meaningful. And every time I'm going to talk to young people, what did you do there in Australia? Did you go surfing there for 4 years? I'll have, a clear answer what I did here, and here's what the achievements are, and this is what the legacy is. And that's my aspiration as a Ukrainian, because in terms of and also to be able to work for the government in this probably the most dire times in Ukraine's history is such a privilege, and I'm continuously humbled by this experience of being able to represent Ukraine at this level, to be able to talk to the Australian Prime Minister, to be able to talk to the New Zealand Prime Minister, to tell him the story, tell them a story, convince them to do more for Ukraine. It's the most rewarding job, because I was blessed to get this opportunity to do it, and I feel like that being able to help Ukraine at this time, that is probably the most rewarding experience in my life, and I will be forever grateful for this opportunity.
This is this is just inspiring, and I wanted to also say that I guess it's also like one like that kind of a job which like yields immediate results, as you mentioned before, and it just gives you more motivation to go further and further and further. And I don't want to keep you long here with us, but just a couple of more questions. You mentioned like that you want to do like, something meaningful, and you are doing, of course. And my question is to you, being an ambassador and having this leadership experience of representing Ukraine in Australia. So, how did your understanding of leadership change since you became ambassador during the wartime?
Look, I would say that I'm a student of leadership, because you always learn it, right?
Yeah.
I'm a big supporter of lifelong learning. I think that we all have to teach ourselves how to learn all the
Mhm.
time. It's not actually easy, by the way. I mean, it takes an effort, and also after a certain age, you find that it's actually more difficult to learn. But I think the way technologies change and the way the world is changing, if we want to be competitive, we want to be in business or be kind of out there still relevant, I think we need to educate ourselves all the time, right? And that also applies to the leadership and the perception of leadership, and how you study it, but also how you practice it and how you do it, right? And I don't have an answer for you, but in a way, coming back to Flex experience, Future Leaders Exchange So my theory, and this is my hypothesis, is, I mean, it was never proved by anybody, but my theory is very simple. If you were told that you're the future leader of Ukraine, and they repeat it many, many, many times, you actually become one, right?
Yep, yep,
I
yep.
know it's a bit like, neuro linguistic programming in a way, but you remember once you got into Flex, this is what they told you when you were doing that, orientation program. They said you were the future leaders of Ukraine, and at the age of 15, I mean, like, you don't really take it seriously, but then you hear it many, many, many times, and then you kind of start believing that you are the next, leader of the country, or you are the next generation who's going to change the country, and you then effectively become one.
Yeah.
So
And
I
it's
believe that that's the leadership that the way I see it. And in my life, I mean, it's always been, I always was trying to do something extra. So for me, like, for instance, I'll just, it's not about bragging, but it's about my personal experience. When I got back from London, it was 2006, right? Literally 20 years ago, right? And I wanted to help other people to get a master's degree abroad, right? So I became an advocate of promoting education abroad among my friends, about young people I knew. And I have personally helped at least 100 people to get on scholarships to the best universities in the world by writing recommendations, by helping with their essays, by just doing it, now I'm talking about, but just practically doing it, right? And for me, I find it like that was the best thing that I could do, because a lot of these people became very successful, right? And I was able to have an impact on the lives of those people, right? By
yeah,
inspiring them, by helping them, by assisting them. And they all had no money, and they all got the scholarships, right? And they went there and they studied. Some of them stayed, some of them came back. It doesn't matter, but they all, were shaped by that experience of doing postgraduate degrees, and what in whatever life they were doing afterwards. I mean, apart from many other things. So for me, like, my kind of involvement in civil society, I mean, I've been involved in civil society throughout my life. So I was in business for 10 years, but going back to university times, I was very active during university times in youth NGOs. And then later on, with Ukraine Crisis Media Center, that was already after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. And then we set up Professional Government Association, and the idea of Professional Government Association was very simple. I mean, we all ran different alumni associations for different universities. And we figured that in 2014, the experience of Maidan, we felt like, well, we need to create a mechanism of how people who are internationally educated, who speak foreign languages, who can help Ukraine reform, change. And actually, one of the ways to do it, why don't we just get more people into the public service and get them interested in public service, right? And we've had our ups and downs. There were some good success stories. Some things didn't work out, but I think that experience also, I became a president in 2015. I basically, with my board, we registered it as a legal entity actually at the time, and I'm very pleased to see that PGA is still around. They're still helping people, and in a way, I got my job through that experience as well. I mean, because it was all connected and related to the work that we did. But the idea originally was very simple, and I still believe in the idea of PGA. How can we mobilize talent for the change? Right? Because look, no matter what we do, we all have one goal in mind. Certainly, we need to put pressure on Russia to end this war. We want this war to be over. We don't know how much longer it's going to last. But then we need to rebuild the country, and the way to rebuild the country, we need to contribute to that rebuild, right? And each one of us can make a contribution. No matter what we do, it doesn't matter if you work for the government, you work for the business, it doesn't matter. You can do it, right? You can make a contribution to the change in education. You can work with international investors. So you can work with some big infrastructure developers in Ukraine. I mean, there are different ways of how you can do it, but I think the mechanism of Professional Government Association, which has kind of united all Western University alumni groups, is how can you get advantage of that human capital, which
yeah.
are the people with their own experiences, their own education, and how you can mobilize that human capital for the change in Ukraine, right? And I do believe in the power of groups and what people can actually achieve when they are really committed, when they're focused and motivated. And I think for me, throughout my life, that's always been an inspiration in a way to believe that, look, I mean, who if it's not us, right? And now that I'm almost 45, right? I remember when I was 20, and like many of the participants of this program, right? And that time has passed very quickly. And I remember when I was always the youngest kid in the group of people that I was with, right? And then all of a sudden I realized that actually, well, not anymore, right? And in a way, by the way, this job that I got now as an ambassador, I'm still the youngest, kind of one of the youngest ambassadors here. But at the same time, I do, aware of the age in a way, and I do realize that I need to help those people who come after me, the generation after, because if I in my generation runs out of time, it will be up to you to do it, right? And we need to create the bridge, right? We need to create an opportunity for people to come back to Ukraine and to make a contribution, to make their own input. Because look, I mean, Ukraine is facing a huge challenge, demographic challenge. It's not only we need to get those 5 millions back, and we need to get another extra 5 million people from somewhere, right? We need to have 3 kids in a family instead of two, maybe 4 kids in a family. How can you do it? Because Ukraine will badly need the people, and hence we need smart policy, but we need good governance. We need rule of law. We need independent judiciary. We need all the basic, human rights respected and democracy in place, right? That's the only way how we can move forward. And certainly, I mean, it's maybe I'm just being too, I don't know, too optimistic. I am an optimistic guy, so I do believe we'll be able to achieve it. But the problem is, Ola, I don't know if it's going to be me who's going to see that, right? And I'm more thinking about the generation of my kids who might be able to see it, but it's not guaranteed. Maybe it's the kids of my kids who'll be able to see Ukraine prosperous. And look, look. I mean, rebuild and reconstructions don't happen quick, right? A lot will depend on our ability to join the EU or not, right? We are, of course, our aspirations are high, but we all know it's not an easy task. I mean, I would say it's a daunting task, and a lot will depend on the political decision of all the EU member states to, expedite or not to expedite our entry into the EU, because that will define whether Ukraine will be able to change quickly or not, right? So look, lots of things have been said, but if you want, a final question, let's do it. Or I
Yeah.
can just make some final remarks.
No, I will just follow up with one final question. The final question is actually, you mentioned a lot about Ukrainian youth who is shaping and will be shaping Ukraine's future. And the only thing I'm curious about is, what do you hope our viewers to remember to get out from your experience from this interview? Maybe a couple of like focal points, something they take and then they go in the wild and apply.
I mean, on one hand, it's an easy question. On the other hand, it's a difficult one, because I think I don't know actually what impression is going to be. Let's collect those impressions and hear what people say. But I think my recommendation is very simple. It's stay curious, get yourself educated, learn foreign languages, experience leadership experience. I mean, it's so important. But how can you learn leadership? I mean, you can't learn it, but you need to start practicing it, right? You need to take responsibility. You need to overcome fear, right? Because fear is what stops us from doing anything, right? We are scared to be rejected, right? We need to overcome it, and it's not an easy one, right? We all have our own fears. We all have our own, you know, in a way, things that stop us, constraints. And I think for young people, the confidence, the way you build your confidence is through experience, but through trying, right? And certainly when you fail, you fail. Take it as an experience. And I think that's the most, failure, I think, is even a better experience than success. But once you have both failure and success, and once you can have a track record of success, you then learn something. You learn how to get focused, how to get motivated, how to, whatever you have in your mind. And by the way, this is my final takeaway from my Flex experience, right? So when I learned about Flex program, I was still about 13, right? And it was, totally, I was just lucky to hear about the program. I mean, as I said, I come from a small town, and so southwestern part of Ukraine. And I met somebody who was about to go on a flex program, and she was 2 years old, and she told me about it. And you didn't have Google at the time to Google it, right? And I got so motivated. In addition to my story about watching the Beverly Hills series, where every Ukrainian kid wanted to be part of Beverly Hills series, right? That the motivation was so strong to study the language, to get through the program, to get selected and actually go, that I was totally obsessed with that. And that experience, I could then replicate many, many times after in my life, throughout my life, right? Be it at university level, be it, after university, be it in whatever I did in business, right? It's that great motivation, focus, in a way, self-sacrifice, but determination. I don't know how to explain that, but it's like you need to be ruthless in how you pursue your goals, right? And certainly, I mean, we can go through different stages. People get depressed. The life in Ukraine is tough. Winter is impacting us, no electricity, no heating. I get it. I mean, but at the end of the day, I mean, we go through ups and downs. But I think it's important to stay focused on whatever goals you have, and be able to just do something every day, which will make your goal or your dream closer in to you. And that actually, that you record it, you write it in your notes, you just go through that painstakingly. Ask for mentorship, ask people for advice. Don't be afraid to ask. You don't ask, you don't get. Always ask. I think that's very important. That's my lesson. That's my main advice, actually. You don't ask, you don't get. That's as simple as that. And I think that's important, to be able to ask, not to be afraid of it. Because the worst thing that's happening, you can get a no, but there may be so many other people who will say yes. And I think that's probably the most useful thing you can take out of it.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. Just on that note, I remember when I was on the US campus, and our professor said, "If you don't vocalize your needs, we will never know what you want and what you need." So that's exactly what you're talking about. And also, one of those results that's like of your hard work that you've done for the past years with the Professional Government Association. I guess it's very important to know that this program, Future Diplomats of Ukraine, is implemented through the Professional Government Association, and we're grateful to the US government for the grant and for their support as well here. So yeah, I guess in unison we did that. Yeah, and Vasil, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your lessons, for your experience. I'm sure that the participants of this program would love listening to this interview as a podcast or as a video. It's up to them. And yeah, and I hope to see you somewhere here in Ukraine in person. Maybe once you come, maybe in April, maybe a bit later or sooner. We can have you
Maybe
here
if
as
we
well.
could do it, when I'm in Kiev and the program is
Yeah,
still ongoing, I'd be happy to swing by. And because it's always, when you actually have an interactive session and see people in live, it's always better. So
yeah.
thank you very much. Have a good one, and I think it's cut. Yeah.
Thank you.